Living Life Juicy podcast. Conversations with interesting people you should know. Welcome to the Living Life Juicy podcast, where we explore how we can be present and kind as we do great things. This is a follow-up conversation with Pastor Tom Steffen. I'm going to give him the mic, and this is truly a place where we get to explore and get to know each other through asking really good questions. So Tom's gonna take over the mic and ask 3 questions. So go ahead, Tom, take it over.
All right, thanks, John. So first question, it goes back to an experience that you and I had when I first came to the church. I asked you, how long does it take for a culture to change? Where we were at Monte Vista, moving from a culture of distrust to a culture of trust. And then you said 5 to 7 years. 5 if you're working fast, 7 years. So here's my question for you. Is that still true as you look at cultural change in organizations or in churches or even in families? Is that still true? And what have you learned since then? So what have you learned in the last 18 years about cultural shifts?
Yeah. Well, culture has become a much bigger topic of conversation in the business world. And I would say some of that change has accelerated. To change a culture will take 3 to 5 years if that organization has been around for any time at all. I mean, if you just started your organization last year, you're still in the molding phase. But what I would say, and this is my intentionally provocative statement, you can't change culture. And I let that sit because culture can change, but you've got to change the systems that reveal that culture. Culture is a reflection of your systems. It's the relationship between the people, processes, and resources, those relationships. Those systems reveal the culture. Culture isn't created or changed, it's revealed through all the systems that you have in place. So if you want to change culture, change the systems that are producing that culture. And that's what a lot of people don't get. And there's a saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I don't buy that because culture and strategy are interrelated. You can have what's called a really positive culture, but if your strategy doesn't take advantage of it, you're going down. You can have an amazing strategy, but if it doesn't fit the culture, it's not going to work. So it's seeing the interplay between strategy and culture, which is going to create that place, that climate, that environment that you choose, that you want your organization to have. I think, and it's realizing that, if you know that culture takes that long to change, strategy can be changed really quickly. And that strategy will tweak or produce the systems and the processes that you want, which will ultimately change the culture to what you want. But if you're just trying to change culture, it's like, you ever take a water balloon, like one of the little ones, and you put it in your hand, and you squeeze it, and a piece pops out? Well, you push that back in, and it pops out someplace else. You push it back in, it pops back someplace else. That's what happens if you try to change culture without changing systems.
Awesome. That's great. And I would say what you just said is one of the reasons why things have shifted at Monte Vista, because we've talked about this a lot. And yeah, that's awesome. Okay, that's good. So that's question number 1. So question number 2. You and I both have a person that we thoroughly enjoy, you more than I, because he belongs to you, Pax. Pax is one of my favorite people in the entire world. What have you learned in being a dad that has surprised you?
That is a wonderful question. I think that my capacity I wouldn't say loving Pax, because I love him beyond measure, but my capacity for acting on my love for him is more limited than I anticipated. In that, so Pax came along later in my life. He's 10 years old right now. And for those of you who've ever lived through that phase, little boy, tons of energy, curious about everything. And about the 50th time he asked the same question in the same way, Usually I've lost it about 10 times before that.
No.
Doesn't stop, it doesn't keep him from doing that. Or um, his desire to get me involved, I find I get limits when I've got to get other stuff done. This goes back to our last conversation with talking about being task oriented. And I have to intentionally stop and go, no, I'm going to pretend to tackle you when you're playing pretend football in the living room. Even though I should be at my computer doing something else, I've got to those are so I think that surprised me that my ability to continue to pursue my love for him is more limited than I thought. I also love his world of imagination.
Mm.
And that's I help people get creative. I help do that, but you never know when he's drawing something. I never know what it is. I think I know. So recently he's gotten way into football, watching football, not playing it, but he pretends to play it. And he's created whole like playoff tables with invented teams. Just so you know, his team is the Newbury Park Thunderbolts, and they play teams like the Portland Oysters. And I love it. He invents these whole worlds for himself. So I that is a huge thing about that I've learned from being Pax's dad, and I enjoy that identity. I am not offended when I'm referred to as Pax's dad, because that's a huge part of who I am. Does that answer the question?
Absolutely. Yeah, I want to ask, this doesn't count as my third question.
2.5.
Yeah, this is 2.5. I don't know if people know, if you've shared this before on your podcast, but if you have, do it again. Explain Pax's name and how you got to Pax's name.
Okay, great question. Pax, for those who don't know, and this is really geeky, Pax is Latin for peace. And for years, I've signed off my emails as peace. In fact, before my mom died, she gave me a rock with peace on it because that's how she thought about our correspondences. And so my wife Priscilla and I were sitting waiting for an appointment to check on the progress of the baby. And I wrongly overheard a conversation between a daughter and her mom who were waiting for an appointment. And I thought the mom asked the question, are we still going to call the baby Pax? Now, I'm pretty sure that's not what she said, but that's what I heard. And Priscilla and I were going over names and all that kind of stuff. So on the way back to our car, I said, hey, Priscilla, what do you think of this? And it sat there for a while. She gave it kind of a positive thing, but when it came time to deciding, we both said, okay, name is Pax. We want to honor our grandparents and also her Korean tradition. So Pax Leroy, which is my grandfather's name, which means the king. Hejin, which is Korean and kind of in the Korean naming tradition, there's things that go together. His just fell on Hejin, Losi. So Pax, peaceful, Leroy, the king, and Hejin means notorious grace. We didn't put that all together until a couple of days after he was born, when we realized his name means peaceful king of notorious grace. That's something that's to live into for sure.
That is awesome. That is worthy of the third question, but that was only 2.5. Peaceful king of notorious grace. That's such a great, I love that. Anyway, I love your kid. He's great, as you know.
And he dressed up as you for Halloween one year. So
he did dress up as me for Halloween, and that was a moment of pride and glory in my life. I was a Halloween character. All right, so third and final question on this lightning round with John Losi. You asked when we had our podcast, the other one that we just did, you talked about music, and I know music has been big in your life and super important in your life. Who are the top 3 musical influences that if you could sit with them, whether they're alive or dead, if you could sit with these 3 people to do what you do right now on a podcast, who are the top 3 musical influences you'd want to sit with on a podcast, ask them questions, and they've had a big impact on you?
Yeah, I think first talking about, and this is going to tell you a little bit, even though I'm still stuck in the singer-songwriter world of the 70s. So the first one that comes along, mostly like just the lyric and the time, would be James Taylor, and just amazing lyrics and thoughtfulness and fun and like just being able to ease in. Next would be David Wilcox, who I believe is a better musician and lyricist, better than James Taylor. Um, and he's had some very significant songs that helped me get through different times. There's one in particular that he wrote long before the Two Towers, but it's called Love Will Show the Way. Just powerful song. Now, the last one is very recent, and it's Jimmy Buffett. Now, most people think of Jimmy Buffett as the beach bum kind of party, Margaritaville, all that kind of stuff. But the very first thing that attracted me to Buffett wasn't those fun songs. I like those, but I learned to play Come Monday on the guitar. It was the first Buffett song I learned how to play, which is just expressing a longing for being with somebody he loves while he's on the road. And I was living out of my truck doing road stuff, so that hit. Now, the last song that he co-wrote and performed before he died was a song called Bubbles Up. And first time, so he died of a very rare and just serious skin cancer. And he records this song called Bubbles Up as he's dying. He knows he's had this, and it's one of the most hopeful songs. And the very first thing, since I taught scuba diving, bubbles up is something that you know, and you probably know this as a surfer. When you get slammed, if you want to orient yourself, you blow some bubbles and then you follow those. Eventually, they lead to the surface. And same as scuba diving, he got it from when he wanted to fly with the Navy pilots. And if you do that over water, you've got to learn the ditching stuff. And his instructor said, Buffett says, how do I know which way's up? How do I get myself oriented? And his instructor said, you can either fart or blow some bubbles and then follow him to the surface. And then before he took off on his flight, his instructor pats him on the head and he says, remember, rock star, bubbles up. And the first part of the song, the first verse, is basically when you're struggling, when the pressure's building up, there's a message I have for you when you feel like you're a leaf tossed in the wind. And that's bubbles up, they will point you towards home, no matter how far or how wide you roam. It'll point to the surface, the plot, and the purpose. And so when the going gets tough, know that you are loved. There's a light up above, and joy, there's always enough. And like perfect message where I was at this last year. The second verse is all about inviting the hard times and the hard things to the table. He talks about to his friends who are jolly. He's basically saying, these are the people who get it. When times are hard, they don't avoid the hard things. They invite them to the table so that everybody gets to talk. The flops and the wins are all sitting there. And that is, to me, is the next step is number one, that if you know you're loved, if you know there's light, and if you know that the joy's enough, that context can help you invite the right things to sit at the table so that you end up appreciating life. So that is the philosophy and theology of Jimmy Buffett's last song.
Wow. I don't know about anyone else on this podcast listening right now, but I'm going to go listen to Bubbles Up right now as soon as I leave this room.
I wrote a whole thing about like that, my interpretation and how it speaks to me and being tenacious and resilient. So that's in my Medium account, and it's in some of my posts and stuff like that. I'll send you that article.
Yeah, that would be great. And I love that would be such a fascinating conversation between Dave Wilcox, James Taylor, and Jimmy Buffett sitting in the same room, and you could just absorb and hear their stories.
Yeah, they're all storytellers. That's what other thing that gets me. It's not like they have their fun light songs, but their best songs are significant stories where they were moved.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, well done, man. Part of your 3 questions, and you nailed them, plus an extra.
Well, thank you for the 3.5 questions. And I appreciate it. And I learned so much about people by the questions that they ask. So thank you so much. And thanks to everybody else for listening to 3 Questions from Tom.
Be present and kind as you do great things.